Welcome, dear students. The focus of the current session is changing grammar during 1500 to 1650. I hope and expect that by the end of this session, you would be able to understand what were the socio-political and cultural situations in the time of Renaissance and the early English period that caused changes in the grammar of English. Well, my dear students, I hope you have some knowledge of the changes in the vocabulary of English during this particular period that we are talking about. We need to compare this grammar and the changes in grammar during this period from 1500 to 1650 with the changes in vocabulary during the same time. Well, the changes in grammar during this time were completely opposite to the changes in vocabulary. The times of Renaissance were the times when there were, a lot of changes that were happening in vocabulary because a lot of new things were happening around in the real life. And as those changes were taking place, to name the things, events, or items, people needed new words. In comparison to that, when we look at the treatment of grammar during this period, it was quite conservative. Now comes the question, what do we mean by conservative? Well, when we use the term conservative here, actually it means all those trends that tend to preserve the existing status. So, retaining its status, not allowing with much flexibility to change it. So what I'm trying to say is that the grammar during this period of English language did not change much. The changes that took place, they came with a lot of caution. Well, my dear students, whatsoever happens to a language has a direct relationship with the on-ground realities. It has a direct relationship with the people who speak it and in the area where it is used and the times, of course, where it is used. When we look at the relationship of various agencies, various factors that were at work during that time, we can see what does it mean that the grammar did not change much. Well, my dear students, during this period, printing press was introduced, and with this introduction into England, printing press brought a lot of books. People started printing books, and because now they were to be given to masses, they were for the masses, according to the readership, the topics and the language changed. Instead of French or Latin, now most of the books were published in English language. The reading habits of people also changed. The privilege of reading a book was limited to a very, very narrow circle of, the royalty. Only the royalty or the nobility or the French aristocracy or some other people from the, the very closer circle of the upper class, they would have access to all those manuscripts that were written. Because, the processes of writing were difficult. Each book had to be written, individually with hand. So it was not an easy process. Now, it was available to people. For the first time, people could read if they wanted to. The result of this reading was they were getting more familiar with language. Now, naturally, in these circumstances, it was not possible, that the language structures would be changed because they needed some stabilization so that people all across, could read and understand them. Advances in learning were taking place as well. And then there were a lot of discoveries and inventions and, in the domain of science, a lot of happenings. This was coupled with the increased communication where people could connect easily and with less effort. And of course, it was cheaper as well. Now, this situation had a relationship with what happened to grammar. There was actually a paradox in this situation. Whereas all these situations that I have talked about were favorable for the spread of ideas, they were supporting and stimulating the growth of vocabulary because they were supporting and stimulating the growth of knowledge. If this was happening on one side, they also paradoxically created a kind of social consciousness to work actively towards the promotion of and the maintenance of a standard language. People for the first time were realizing that, okay, this is our language, we need to retain it, we need to make it specific, we need to kind of give it a standard and a form and a structure, and we need to give it a peculiar shape. So there was a particular focus, a kind of consciousness, both on the individual level as well as on the collective level amongst the people regarding, the stability in the usage of grammar. Unlike the previous times where people could use the structures they wanted to use, now people started feeling that there had to be rules, and those rules should be strictly followed with reference to grammar. Just to give a quick reference, if I take you back to Old English language, I hope you would have some knowledge that in Old English, there were far more possibilities of flexibilities of structures in the syntax, whereas Middle English comparatively had lesser possible structures. Now these times, the times of Renaissance, the times from 1500 to 1650, imposed even more restrictions. Also, my dear students, there was an impact of education. A flux of new vocabulary was coming on. It was not possible, that all the changes would come in one go altogether. This, education, though, was increasing vocabulary simultaneously, and very interestingly, I would say, it was providing formal instruction on grammar. Because education was spreading, students would go to school, there they would learn grammar formally. The spellings were being stabilized and were being standardized. The syntax was being formalized. And all these changes in grammar that were taking place, they were of very minor nature. Otherwise, when we talk of the nature of changes in grammar, we would say it was more a time of stability. It was opposite to the old ages, the Middle Ages especially, where, there were a lot of changes in the structure and in the syntax of language.